Hello there, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexia Podcast series, brought to you by Rethink Dyslexia, the podcast where we're breaking barriers and doing things differently. I'm Shae Wissell, your host, and I'm so glad you can join us. I'm a fellow neurodivergent, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the tribes across our beautiful country and to all First Nations people listening today. Our podcast was born in 2017 out of a need to give a voice to the stories and perspectives of adults with dyslexia. And our voice has grown stronger year after year. We're now a globally listened to podcast with guests from all around the world. Join us for insightful conversations about living with dyslexia and other neurodivergences across all walks of life. Our special focus is on adult education, employment, social and emotional wellbeing, and entrepreneurship. We're excited to be bringing you this episode and invite you to like and follow us, or even better, why not leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. So let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of the Dear Dyslexia Podcast show. I'm your host, Shae Wissell, and today we're going to be taking a bit of a different approach where I'm going to be talking about my research. And so throughout this year, we're going to shake it up a little bit with having me doing some podcasts on my own and then bringing guests on. But I recently had published my research titled I Hate Calling It a Disability, looking at dyslexia through an intersectional lens. And this research follows the work I've done through my doctorate. And so I wanted to share it with you today because it's a really lengthy paper and it wouldn't be very dyslexic friendly if I just shared the paper and I didn't give some type of summary around the research as well. Previously, we've done some infographics, but today I thought I'd use the opportunity to use the podcast to talk about the research and this paper. And really, it's a powerful look into how labels can impact our self-perception and the inclusion of dyslexics within society. It was co-authored by Dr. Judith Hudson, one of my mentors who works closely with me, Dr. Rebecca Flower from La Trobe University, and then one of my peers, Bill Go, who is a dyslexic PhD student. And what we wanted to do was bring a fourth person in that could look at it from a lived experience perspective and review it from a dyslexic perspective. So we didn't just have researchers writing this paper. So let's take a bit of a deep dive into what this paper actually means for our dyslexic community and society as a whole. Firstly, let's understand the background. So for those of you who are listening that may not know about dyslexia or what it is, it affects 1 in 10 of us. In the US, they say it affects 1 in 5. So really quite high prevalence rates. And it makes up the largest neurodivergent group. So if we're thinking about other neurodivergent groups like autism or ADHD, those with autism make up about 1 to 2% of the population at the moment. Those with ADHD make up around 5 to 8%, and then dyslexics are making up 1 in 10 or 1 in 5. Prevalence rates are changing all the time. We're seeing lots of adults being diagnosed at the moment with autism, ADHD, and also dyslexia. So at the moment, we're the leading neurodivergent difference, but this may change over time. Yet for many, dyslexia still remains really misunderstood and often overshadowed by misconceptions and other neurodevelopmental differences, and still a lot of stigma attached to being dyslexic. So this research took a qualitative approach where we interviewed adults with dyslexia and employers separately, so not their employers, but other employers, to understand how labels like disability, neurodivergence, superpower influenced those with dyslexia's lives. So one of the key take-homes is that labels really do matter. Participants overwhelmingly felt and rejected the term disability, and not because they don't face significant challenges or different challenges, but because the term often carries stigma and discrimination. For some, the label felt limiting, forcing them into a box that didn't align with their complex realities and also didn't really talk about their strengths. One participant said that I hate calling it a disability. It's society's barriers, not me, that disable me. And this perspective really aligns with the social model of disability, which argues that it's not an individual's traits that disable them, it's society's lack of accommodations and supports. Think about it. If workplaces, schools, and communities embrace diverse ways of thinking and learning, dyslexia might not be perceived as a limitation at all. But what about the other side of the spectrum? The idea that dyslexia is a superpower. This label is gaining significant traction at the moment, and we've seen recent campaigns made by Dyslexia who are emphasising the strengths like lateral thinking and problem solving that those with dyslexia can have. And we're seeing this big movement, particularly on social media at the moment, around these terms of superpower. Yet this research highlighted that most dyslexic adults did not resonate with the term superpower either. They acknowledged that they had strengths like resilience, creativity, and empathy, but many saw these as coping mechanisms developed over time to navigate a world that isn't dyslexia friendly. So not innate superpowers that we're born with, but skills that we develop because we're constantly having to use them to navigate our way around the world. One participant shared, "I built strengths out of necessity, not because of magical abilities." These perspectives remind us to celebrate strengths, but without romanticising or ignoring the very real challenges that dyslexic individuals face. And we found that these types of labels may marginalise those with dyslexia who are really struggling day to day with their difficulties, who don't have functional reading skills, who can't fill out forms, who can't get a job or are being underemployed because of their dyslexia when really they've got a high amount of skills that they could be using. And so this is part of society's need to start changing the way we look and think about dyslexia. Also, out of the research, we looked at the intersectional lens, and that's looking at how power can play in an individual's life and the impact that we may have on what a power structure might look like. And so we looked at this through the power of labels placed on individuals with dyslexia. So for those that see dyslexia as a superpower, they seem to be the ones in high-profile careers or high-profile jobs. They're at the top of their career ladder, and so it doesn't affect them if they disclose they're dyslexic anymore. It doesn't impact their financial ability. It doesn't impact their job role or their career opportunities. And so they're the ones sitting up at the higher point of that hierarchy. And then if we think of the medical model where we're diagnosed with a disability or difficulty, and that's through specialists or health practitioners, again, so there's that power dynamic of a medical model where a practitioner is telling you you've got this disability now based on the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Mental Health Psychiatry Disorders. I've got that wrong. We'll put it up so you can read it, but the DSM-5 is what diagnoses us as having dyslexia or a specific learning disability or difficulty in the first place. And then if we think about that from a power structure again, when we're in school, the teacher has all the power, the student doesn't. And then when we're in the workplace, the employer has the power to place these labels on us rather than us being able to own and really identify with these labels. So we're looking at the different power structures involved. And that's something that hasn't really been looked at before and was a really interesting part of the research that we undertook as well when writing this paper. I think also the fact that when we interviewed employers, they really saw dyslexia, again, if you're thinking about power, as a real strength in the workplace, that they could see how dyslexic employees could be real value or an asset to an organisation because of their different ways of thinking and doing things and the way they can contribute. But these employers had exposure to dyslexia through their children or a family member already. So they could already understand the difficulties those employees were facing, and they already knew the kinds of compensatory strategies and supports that they put in to really enable their dyslexic employees to thrive and shine in the workplace.
At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we are helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more or book your free consultation today.
So the third label we wanted to look at was really this neurodivergence label that's come about in the last couple of years, particularly on social media, neurodiversity has been around for a long time and was coined by Judy Singer, looking at the strengths that autistic people in her family had and coming from a strength-based model rather than a deficit model, and that neurodiversity, we need diversity in everything we do, from biodiversity to the workplace to education to society. If we don't have diversity, then we can't grow and learn and thrive. And that's what we see in the environment. If you look at biodiversity, we take some mixture of plants and animals and the environment to enable things to thrive, and that's what we need as a community as well. So really strength-based. And then over the last 5 years, we've seen this neurodivergent movement come through in this label, where we say everyone in the world is diverse, we're all neurodiverse, but then those that are neurodivergent or have dyslexia or autism AD, we diverge off the diverse. And that means that we have a different way of thinking to the general population. And again, looking at those strengths around the different ways of thinking and doing things. And so what we've seen is this huge push, particularly through the autistic community and now the ADHD community, to really take hold of this neurodivergent label. But we're also seeing it watered down because multiple conditions and differences are now being placed under this label. We've got bipolar, we've got mental health conditions and differences, we've got neurodevelopmental differences. And so what we're seeing is then, if everyone's put under this big umbrella, then our difficulties are not supported properly, because we're saying, okay, that group of people in our workplace are neurodivergent, so they just need a quiet space, low lighting, and we put these particular labels then on what they may need, when dyslexics really need a different type of supports to those that are autistic or those that are ADHD. But we also know that these conditions overlap significantly. And so if you're dyslexic, there's a high chance that you might have ADHD or you might have autism. And so some of these strategies will work for the broader group, but there's also specific strategies that are needed to ensure that dyslexics are thriving in the workplace. And so we don't want to get lost. And what our research found was the dyslexic community wasn't really embracing the neurodiversity or neurodivergence label either. They weren't feeling part of that community, and that at the moment it feels like we don't really have a broader community to be part of, and that the neurodivergent conversation has really been centered around autism and ADHD, when it's so much broader than that, and we need to start thinking in the workplace more broadly than those two conditions. So where do we go from here? The research really makes a compelling case for rethinking the different labels altogether, and what we're seeing through social media and what we're seeing in the news and globally around these different labels. For those with dyslexia, identity-first language, like saying I am dyslexic rather than I have dyslexia, was empowering, but they use both terms interchangeably. And so sometimes when I go to speak, people say it's not dyslexia, it's a specific learning difficulty or a specific learning difference. And yes, that's the label used in the DSM-5, but what are adults and what are individuals wanting to use for themselves? And at the moment, dyslexic and dyslexia seem to be the most common, most comfortable terms for them to be using at the moment. So we can't take that away from them. That is their preference. So whether you're an education employer, a parent, you have to let that individual choose what label is most suitable and most comfortable for them in their skin. So the choice of language may seem small, but it has a ripple effect, and employers and educators can adopt these terms to foster environments where dyslexic individuals feel valued and understood. And this isn't just good for dyslexics, it's good for everyone. When we challenge ableist language, like we've talked about, and what we saw in the research, so dumb, stupid, try harder, not find detailed enough. We had one participant ask what it was like to have an intellectual disability, and some really negative labels that were placed on our participants from a young age. And those labels were sticky and they stuck to them. And as they progressed into adulthood, they still had those labels, feelings attached to them. So we could see the impact that this had on self-esteem and self-confidence and people's ability to then be able to self-advocate if they're going to, and disclose, because if they're going to disclose, the fear of those labels coming back and resurfacing is a real fear for people, and is a real challenge and a real stigma that we have to try and break through. And so those ableist language and terms like everyone's a bit dyslexic, or, everyone struggles with spelling. That's true. Everyone can struggle with spelling, but we actually have a difficulty that affects us with our spelling altogether. So we really need to redesign workplaces and classrooms and society in general to be more inclusive, where we can unlock the potential of our entire community that has really historically underestimated and undermined those with dyslexia. And for the first time, we're really looking at what adults want. We haven't had the opportunity in Australia. I'm not sure why we have the least amount of research in Australia on adulthood dyslexia, particularly compared to other neurodivergent differences. And this really needs to change. So I'll get off my soapbox and let's look at some strategies that can help us moving forward. So we need to dismantle ableist language. So superpower can be an ableist language, just like dumb, stupid, or lazy. And there's 3 actionable ways we could start to do that. And that's through embracing strength-based labels instead of focusing solely on the deficits. Let's highlight the strengths and unique ways dyslexic individuals approach problem-solving, lateral thinking. What Made by Dyslexia has created is a dyslexic thinking term that you can use on LinkedIn now. Whether that resonates with you or not, I'm not sure, but it really is trying to look at what are those positive terms. And for employers to really start to frame dyslexics and dyslexia as an asset to their organisation, not a challenge, because really when we've got the right supports in place, we are an asset to organisations, and our research is starting to demonstrate that. Also, that we need to create psychologically safe environments in schools, in workplaces and beyond. Many participants shared experiences of shame or fear of disclosing their dyslexia, especially in the workplace. So by fostering open communication, offering accommodations without judgment, we can start to create environments where people feel safe to be their true authentic selves. And that's what we want, is that everyone in society can be their true authentic self, and that it's okay to be different. And then educate and advocate. Constantly what we're doing is educating and advocating, and this is what this research is doing. We need to start reducing the misconceptions about dyslexia that persist across society. Educators, employers and policymakers need to be trained to understand dyslexia beyond reading difficulties. They need to start recognising its diverse impacts, from processing speed to working memory challenges to significant mental health challenges that we can face. Burnout, poor self-esteem, lower overall well-being outcomes compared to the general population, higher rates of suicide attempts and anxiety and depression. All these things could be reduced if there was better understanding of how to support and work with dyslexic adults. So at the core of this research, it really highlights that labels are not just words, they're tools of power, and used thoughtfully, they can validate experiences and open doors. Used carelessly, they can marginalise and exclude and cause significant harm to individuals. By listening to the voices of dyslexic adults, as this study has done, we can start to build a society that truly values those with dyslexia. And I think it really indicates the need to start having dyslexics at the table, whether it's a neurodivergent conversation, whether it's looking at the medical model, whether it's looking at policy change and what supports are in place. Dyslexics need to be at the table in the workplace and education. It's not just the parents now. We're moving beyond just parents into adulthood, and dyslexic individuals need to be there, and we're not right now. We're not in the neurodivergent conversation. We're not in any policy change. There's no Senate inquiry into dyslexia. There's no dyslexia strategy being put together. And so government in particular really needs to start thinking about, why is this happening? Why are we not there compared to other neurodivergent conditions? So to all the dyslexics listening today, thank you. Your experience matters, your voice matters, and you are more than just your labels. And to our allies, it's time to rethink how we speak about and support dyslexics, because everyone deserves the opportunity to thrive, and we deserve to start being at the table, listened to, and included in these conversations. To find out more about the research paper, you can head to deardyslexic.com.au, and the research paper is available for you to download and read further. So once again, thank you for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you next month with our latest guest, which will be Rob on dyscalculia. So that will be an exciting and interesting conversation to have around how we can better support young people and adults who have dyscalculia. So thank you for tuning in to this podcast around my research, and let's continue to advocate, learn, and build a more inclusive world together. Until then, bye for now.
If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening and bye for now.
Oh, yeah.